I think we're going to start so that Dr. Lee has enough time to talk and there's enough time for questions at the end. Sharon's on vacation today, so I get to introduce Dr. Lee. And I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what Dr. Lee does and her experience, just so you recognize the amount of weight and effort that is going into what she's going to talk about. Dr. Lee graduated from the University of Arizona in their Human Development and Family Studies doctoral program, and then came here to our Addictive Behaviors Research Program. Has been on the faculty since 2004. A lot of her research focuses around underage and college-age drinking and marijuana use and other substances. And I've heard her talk before, and it's very clever in the way often that it incorporates technologies and other things that keep college-age students entertained and interested and actually responding in different types of interventions. So she is kind of bridging this idea between developmental theory and then applied interventions using this transition from in college into adulthood. So she's the principal investigator on 3 grants. She's published over 50 papers on alcohol use and is recognized as one of the most well-published, most peer-reviewed researchers on alcohol in the country, underage alcohol use. And there's, amongst the work she does now, some things focus on episodes of peak use, like spring break or 21st birthday, and some of them are more focused on kind of chronic daily interventions for alcohol and marijuana, cataloging, and then using that cataloging as a way to build insight and intervention. So, Dr. Lee is very distinguished, and I'd like to thank her for coming to talk to us.
Thank you, Ryan, for that very lovely introduction. I'm very excited today to be talking about one of my lines of research, focusing on event-specific drinking and prevention among college students. Before I begin, I wanted to talk a little bit more about myself and give you a little bit more background in addition to what Ryan said. By training, I'm a developmentalist, and I approach the topic of young adult alcohol, marijuana use, other risk behaviors from a developmental perspective. And what that means is I really consider use in the context of normative development, integrating how personal goals, how motivations, and how context might influence behavior, and vice versa. Themes of my research focus on identifying who may be at most at risk for use, for negative consequences, and identifying critical periods of vulnerability. Those could be across the life course or specific events such as 21st birthdays or spring break. I'm also very interested in developing and evaluating novel prevention and intervention programs for high-risk marijuana and alcohol use among young adults. So I wanted to begin by talking about the state of college student mental health. I was at a meeting a few days ago where there was a representative from the UW Counseling Center there, and she was saying that the Counseling Center is seeing about a 40% increase in intakes there as compared to last year. And that is very similar to some research that's been going on showing that 92% of Counseling Center directors are reporting increases in students who are presenting with severe psychological problems. In a study using NIAAA data, Blanco and colleagues have found that nearly 46% of students met past year prevalence of Axis I psychiatric disorders, personality disorder, or substance use disorder. And we see that alcohol use disorders are the most prevalent among all of those. Psychiatric disorders are found to interfere with college attendance and reduced likelihood of successful college completion. So there's a number of students on our college campuses that are struggling, and for a variety of reasons. College student drinking receives a lot of attention, and there's a lot of focus from college administrators to the media. Washington State was recently thrown into the national spotlight in the last few weeks with unfortunate incidences that have happened at Central Washington University. If some of you aren't familiar with what happened there, 9 students who were at an off-campus party were hospitalized for having high blood alcohol concentrations. And it turns out that they were drinking high alcohol caffeinated drinks there. When we look at the prevalence of alcohol use, most students drink alcohol in the past year, in the past month, at least once. Thanks, so you can all hear me a little bit better. One of the things that is concerning is the pattern of use that college students engage in, often drinking primarily on the weekends, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and with many of them drinking high amounts on those occasions. When we look at past year prevalence of alcohol use disorders, about 12.5% diagnosed with alcohol abuse and 8.1% with alcohol dependence. Of those, only approximately 3.9% of them ever seek treatment or receive treatment. So there's a lot of people who are out there who are having issues with alcohol who are not getting help. Alcohol is also related to a number of very harmful consequences. Alcohol is the leading cause of alcohol-related injuries and accidents, is the leading cause of death among college students between the ages of 18 and 24. These include motor vehicle accidents. There's numbers, and there's thousands of students across the nation who are also getting injured, assaulted, or experiencing sexual assault as a result of drinking or of other people's drinking. Looking at additional consequences that college students may experience, and here's just a few of them. Students often report blacking out. They could have unprotected sex as a result of drinking, injuring themselves, doing things that they later regret. Some of these are pretty low prevalence, such as 1.2% seriously considering suicide as a result of drinking. However, that's very serious. If we were to take the undergraduate population this year at UW, that would equal about 320 students who would be considering suicide as a result of drinking. And that's pretty scary. While those percentages are very alarming, we have been making advances in prevention and intervention efforts on college campuses. In 2002, the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism published a report from a task force that they had created a few years ago, focusing on the state of prevention and intervention efforts on college campuses. Our own Mary Larimer in the Department of Psychiatry published one of the papers that reviewed individual-oriented strategies for college student intervention. In this task report, they recommend 3 strategies that have shown documented efficacy for dealing with college students in high-risk alcohol use. And those include challenging alcohol expectancies, having brief motivational enhancement therapy, and using cognitive behavioral skills training and norms clarification. In fact, the last 2 of those programs were developed here at UW and are seen as model programs for addressing high-risk alcohol use in college with college students. One of those programs, brief alcohol screening and intervention for college students, also called the BASICS, is one that I'm going to highlight today because that's one that we adapt for our event-specific prevention. Very short, some of you know a lot about this. I'll give you a 30-second overview about it, but it involves 2 sessions. The first session is an assessment where a student will do a 1-hour interview and complete a brief drinker profile. They'll do self-monitoring in between the 2 sessions about their drinking and the context where they may be drinking, and that's done for up to 2 weeks. Then in the second session, they'll meet with a facilitator or a therapist and go over some of the things that they reported in the first assessment. This session is done in a motivational interviewing style, which is non-judgmental, and just kind of meets the student where they're at, and it utilizes a personalized feedback sheet, which highlights some of their answers. It compares to normative information, goes over the drinking patterns. It also talks about their perceptions of risks, about their beliefs about what alcohol may do for them if they were to engage in drinking, consequences, and that type of thing. I'm not going to show personalized feedback right now, but I will be showing you how we've adapted that in our event-specific prevention programs. Now, we know that drinking is not evenly distributed across the academic year. In fact, we see lots of ebbs and flows in drinking, and that corresponds with the academic calendar. Students tend to drink less during midterms and finals, and they tend to drink more during holidays, specific special personal events to them, as well as breaks, New Year's week, spring break week, that type of thing. One of the interesting things that we find is that for low drinkers, people who typically, on average, don't drink, if they do drink, they tend to drink on specific events. Thanksgiving, New Year's, spring break week, those types of things. Most of our intervention efforts focus on high-risk drinkers. Obviously, those are the ones that are kind of being flagged. They, get mandated, they're in trouble in the residence hall, so they get mandated to see somebody. And it may be these low drinkers who really aren't getting any intervention or prevention messages, and they're under the radar. So they are important to think about. In addition, several studies have found that light drinkers are at greater risk of experiencing negative consequences when they drink more than they typically do. We find this for general drinking occasions, so on a typical Friday night, if someone drinks more than they normally do. I have found this on spring break, and we've also found this with 21st birthday drinking and consequences. Just to give you an example, in this slide, it shows the relationship between spring break drinking and expected zero values. In this case, that means the absence of having a spring break consequence for low, medium, high level typical drinkers. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but if you look at the y-axis, a higher number is kind of greater odds of not experiencing a consequence. And if you kind of go lower, that would be greater odds. You think of it as greater odds of experiencing a consequence on spring break. And you can see the dotted line is folks who typically light drinkers, maybe drinks one drink a week. And you can see that their risk is greater of experiencing any consequence as a result of drinking. And of course, it kind of evens out as you drink more, because you're going to have the negative consequences, physiological consequences, once your BAC gets to a certain level. And there may be a number of reasons for this. We hypothesize that it could be the lack of experience that these light drinkers have in certain contexts, not quite sure how to deal with the effects as they're feeling them. They have less tolerance for alcohol, those types of things. So why target specific events? One, they're celebratory in nature oftentimes, such as 21st birthdays, or they're personally significant. People make plans for these specific events. We can think of other events as tailgating, 4th of July, New Year's Eve, that type of thing. There's possibly different motivations for drinking during these times versus an average, Friday, Thursday, Saturday night. Some people have the intent of getting, drinking a lot and getting feeling effects that would be okay on the particular day, but maybe not on another day. And oftentimes there's cultural norms and expectations for behaviors. For example, on 21st birthdays, there are things out there that college students talk about a lot, such as the power hour, 21 runs, 21 for 21, in which you try and get 21 shots in 1 hour between the hours of midnight and, say, 1 a.m., right as you turn 21 and before the bars close. So that obviously is very, very risky and will get your BAC very high. We know that specific events are associated with greater and more severe consequences. Consequences don't stop because it's your 21st birthday. And so that's important to think about for these students. Most of our prevention and intervention strategies focus on non-specific drinking. They focus on general drinking. They don't target specific days. And we also know that specific events are predictable. If we know that something's going to happen on one day and somebody is going to be at great risk, why not try and stop it? Why not try and give information so the person can make informed decisions before they go out for their birthday? And college campuses have very limited resources. And so perhaps it makes sense to focus efforts. I previously showed a slide talking about prevalence of consequences and annual prevalence. And some of those were pretty high. But what if it's the case that most of those consequences happen on one day, not spread out over the whole year? It might be in our best interest to really focus and target our intervention strategies. I really like this slide. And it shows what could happen if you have a targeted and intensive prevention and what we can do. If you think back to almost 1 year ago, what was the topic in the news and we were all talking about? H1N1. So from August 2009 to February 2010, on college campuses there were 4 deaths, 169 hospitalizations, and 94,000 cases of influenza-like illnesses. A lot of prevention. We all heard the messages. That's what was going on college campuses. If we take alcohol use for that same period of time, using Hingson's kind of estimates from national data, the same period of time from alcohol, we would see or estimate 1,000 deaths, 350,000 injuries, 250,000 students who had unprotected sexual encounters. That's alarming to me. So I think it makes sense, and that's why I get really excited about prevention and intervention, and why I think that targeting specific events might be worthwhile. So moving on to event-specific prevention, we call it ESP for short. No mind reading or anything like that. Event-specific prevention. A number of years ago, Clayton Neighbors and Clayton used to be in this department and now is at the University of Houston. A number of years ago, we came together and we were really interested in developing a new paradigm of prevention focused in on specific events. Clayton had previously done some work with 21st birthdays, and I had done some work with spring break and spring break trips and consequences. I had also just finished a study where I had developed a web-based marijuana intervention for college students. And so we had decided what a great idea to come together, pull our forces together, and let's create an event-specific prevention. And so we did that, and we decided to start off with web-based because we know that college students are very tech-savvy and they like things at their fingertips. And so we thought, okay, well, let's adapt some of the stuff that we know works in person for general college student drinking, high-risk college student drinking, that has been done in person. It's also been done in the mail. It's been shown to be efficacious. Let's translate that to the web. Let's see what happens. So we first got our funding from the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute here at the University of Washington. And that gave us pilot data to then apply for an R01 grant, which I'm currently running. And I also have a grant with Dr. Megan Patrick at the University of Michigan, who used to be a postdoctoral fellow with me. And she is also focusing on spring break down at the University of Michigan. So I'm going to now talk about kind of the development of our prevention strategies and give you a sneak preview of some results. So on what occasions do students drink the most? In one of the studies that we've done, we see that students drink the most. We compared other holidays throughout the year using timeline follow-back data. So we have lots of data every day across the whole year. And we were comparing it against 21st birthdays. So everybody in the study was 21. And we find that 21st birthdays had the highest amounts of alcohol. It was followed by New Year's Eve and then the 4th of July. Focusing in just on 21st birthday drinking, most students drink on their birthday. Most students drink with their friends, and there's a lot of things around the birthday that is significant. It's the transition to legal drinking age. There's this perception that most people drink, and they drink a lot on their birthday. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. People celebrate with their friends, and it's interesting, their friends are often the ones that are planning the celebrations, and friends could either be risky or they could, somewhat be protective in that friends are the ones buying the celebrant the drinks, encouraging them to drink. But friends can also be protective in that they're watching out for them, they're making sure they get home safe, and those types of things. Majority of students underestimate how much they'll actually consume. So if you ask them before their birthday, how much do you think they'll drink? They'll tell you something. If you ask them after their birthday, how much did you actually drink? They'll tell you something higher. And nearly half of all students drink at levels that exceed their previous max. So this is the most that they've ever drank. Almost half of the people on their birthday. So we did a study with over 1,000 students at UW who recently turned 21. It's the week after their 21st birthday. And I estimated their estimated blood alcohol concentrations on their birthday, depending on kind of how much they drank, over what period of time, their gender, and their weight. Here at UW during that year, we saw that about 19% of students did not drink alcohol on their birthday. And a large number, almost half of the students, drank actually quite moderately, having a BAC of 0.08 or less. The mean BAC was a 0.126, and the mean number of drinks was 6.27 drinks. One thing that is quite alarming that I'd like to bring your attention to are the two that are in red. Here we see that 13.2% of the students had reported reaching an estimated blood alcohol concentration of 0.30 or higher. And at that level, there is risk of coma or death. And so if we were to take that number, that percentage, and estimate how much, what that would be for this UW population, undergraduate population turning 21 this year, that would be 380 students who could potentially reach BACs of 0.30 or higher on their birthday this year. When focusing on consequences on their 21st birthday, there's a lot of people who are getting sick. 44% having hangovers. There's a number of folks who will report getting sick to their stomach, throwing up, or even blacking out. The challenge for prevention is that students often see this occasion as a special event, and as I mentioned before, might be okay with experiencing these things. We talk with a number of students, and we ask them, what do you anticipate happening? And they'll say, I anticipate throwing up, I anticipate even blacking out, my friends will be there, it'll be okay. How do you work with that when it's okay to experience these types of things? So that's a big challenge for us. I previously mentioned that there's misperceptions about how much people drink on their birthdays. On average during that year, 6.27 drinks was the average number of drinks that people consumed. If you were to ask them, how much do you think the typical UW college student drinks on their 21st birthday? On average, the number was 10.4. Of course, some higher, some lower, but that's a kind of 66% overestimate. And so that's very interesting. This is a component that we incorporate into our interventions, really focusing on clarifying what that norm really is. The feedback that we give hopefully shows that, not everybody drinks as much as you do, and not everybody drinks as much as you think they do. If we can actually get the norm a little bit lower and to be a little bit more accurate, we might see that people aren't, going out and trying to drink 10 drinks on their birthday. It might be a little bit more moderate and more in line with what is actually happening. Other things that we've studied are protective behavioral strategies on 21st birthdays. And protective behavioral strategies are things that students will engage in to minimize harm or to lower their possible BAC. These are things like using designated drivers, alternating their drinks with water, putting ice in their drinks so you don't have as much alcohol in your cup, those type of strategies. Global analyses, cross-sectional analyses, suggest that the more strategies someone uses, the less they tend to drink on overall, and the less number of consequences they experience overall. This could be like in the last month, in the last 3 months, and that type of thing. Interestingly, if you look at just the event level, pick one day, 21st birthdays, we actually see the opposite relationship. We see that using more strategies is associated with more drinking and more consequences. And this is really important for prevention. So you can think, well, we're trying to get people to use more strategies. But the thing that we see here is that what's important is the strategies that they use. It's not just increasing the number of strategies. We find that students tend to utilize the strategies that reduce harm, like using designated drivers, but tend not to use strategies which actually lower their BAC. And so that makes sense that then just using more could also be associated with drinking more and having more consequences. And so we've really thought about this and are incorporating this into our prevention, in that it really might make sense to sit down and talk about what strategies make sense for you and why these strategies would work perhaps a little bit better, and the goal of the different strategies. So really briefly, there have been a couple of programs that have been tested regarding 21st birthdays in prevention. The first one, Be Responsible About Drinking, the BRAD campaign. At Michigan State University a number of years ago, there was a student named Brad McHugh, and he had just turned, it was the eve of his 21st birthday, and he consumed 24 shots. He passed away. His family did not want other families to go through the same thing that they were going through. So they decided to develop a campaign in which they developed a birthday card, and they were going to send it out to students on campus as they were turning 21, telling the story of their son, in addition to giving some information about alcohol poisoning and some other types of things. So that's the first campaign. The second one is a study that Neighbors had, Clayton had done using birthday cards with just a moderation message. Nothing having to do with alcohol. There's just a picture of a person eating a birthday cake, like a whole birthday cake going into the mouth, and there's just a message like, you don't do things in excess. You might not feel so good the next day. And then another birthday card strategy done by Melissa Lewis included normative information, similar to the ones I showed you a few slides ago, where students were kind of creatively asked to fill in how much they think other students drink, how much they plan to drink. They open up the card, and then it tells them kind of what the average student drank on that campus. Overall, these strategies have not been found to be effective. And I think what kind of take-home message is that we need something more than a birthday card, just sending that out to students to really affect their drinking on their birthday. So that leads me to our first study, the one that was funded by the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute here at UW. We had a small pilot study, and our goal was to, as I said before, to obtain preliminary data for our R01 grant. And it was also, we were also doing it to evaluate the prevalence and magnitude of consequences associated with 21st birthday celebrations, and to evaluate the efficacy of our personalized feedback intervention. This was done in 2006-2007. We had about nearly 300 students who were enrolled in this study and followed up with 282 after the birthday. Students were screened. It was all done online, and our screening criteria was just drinking 2 or more drinks on the intending to drink 2 or more drinks on their 21st birthday. And students were randomized to one of 2 conditions: receiving web-based personalized feedback or to an assessment-only control condition. And this is the first study of 21st birthdays that uses a pre-post design, and so we're very excited about this study. Just really fast, the procedures. 1 week before their birthday, they were invited to the study. They completed online screening, baseline, and then randomized to condition. 2 days prior to their birthday, if they were in the intervention condition, they received a link to our personalized feedback, online personalized feedback. Control group didn't get anything. They also got a reminder the day before their birthday to look at their feedback. And then 4 days after their birthday, they were invited to complete a follow-up survey where we asked them how much they actually drank, what did they experience on their birthday and the days surrounding their birthday. The intervention consisted of a number of different components based on the basics feedback. You know, we like birthday cards, so we couldn't get all the way away from birthday cards. So this is the one that we created. You finally have enough balloons over your head, and you see there's different kind of pictures of alcohol there. Don't get carried away. Have a happy and safe 21st birthday. It was signed by then President Mark Emmert and Vice Provost of Student Affairs Eric Godfrey. In the personalized feedback, we talked about, or we presented information about drinking intentions and blood alcohol concentration information, how to calculate your blood alcohol concentration, what your intentions would put you at if you actually drank that much. The one way this study or this intervention differs from the basics kind of proper intervention, other than that's general drinking, is that we really focus on drinking intentions. We're talking about one event that's coming up in a few days. And so that's kind of one of the biggest differences in the interventions. We also provide normative information. You think students drink this much. This is what you report thinking you're intending to drink. This is what students actually drink. There's a component focusing on alcohol expectancies. We know that a lot of students think that alcohol will make them more social, that it will make them more outgoing. And so we just try and give some information for them to think about that might not actually be happening. It might be a placebo effect, and that there is research, lots of research out there suggesting that the social effects of alcohol are based on placebo. If you think that's going to happen, it's most likely you're going to say it's going to happen. Expected consequences for drinking, as well as protective behavioral tips, strategies and tips. Here is the first component of the feedback. We use both graphics and text to reinforce our message. This person says they plan to drink 18 drinks on their birthday. They think that everybody else is planning to drink 21, or actually consumes 21 drinks on their birthday. Here we highlight that actually on campus, students drink 6.8 drinks on their birthday. Here's another component. Intended blood alcohol concentration. Again, we give them what they said. We calculate what BAC that would put them at, and drinking 18 drinks in 8 hours for this person puts them at a BAC of 0.4 or higher. And so we highlight on the bottom kind of what that might be, as well as other things. So hopefully students can read this and say, wow, I didn't know that. That's really high. I think I might want to be more at a lower level. One thing I do want to say is if you could just kind of take this slide in, don't read it all, but just kind of the formatting of it, because this is one that I'm going to show you how we've adapted along the way. And here are some tips and pointers, the strategies that we were talking about. Avoiding mixing different types of alcohol, drink water in between drinks. There's safety in numbers, that type of thing. So what did we find? We found a significant intervention effect for reducing estimated blood alcohol concentrations. Small, moderate effect sizes. We also found that the intervention was moderated by pre-birthday intention. So the intervention worked really well for those who are intending to drink more. We also found that the intervention was mediated by by norms. So students who reduced their norms showed reductions in drinking, or didn't drink as much as the control group. So this is promising. This is good. This is good news. We're very excited now. So where do we go from here? Then we applied to NIAAA for our next study, where we wanted to extend this previous study and develop in-person interventions. So if we could get an effect with the web, could we maybe get a better effect if we brought people into and actually talked with them one-on-one, similar to how Basics originally was developed and run? We also wanted to extend this to other specific events, primarily to spring break. We also had the idea that why don't we try and incorporate friends into the intervention? What might that look like? What would that be? We know that for 21st birthdays and for spring break, particularly going on spring break trips, friends are very important for that time. As I mentioned before, the friends are really planning the birthday celebration, and there could be driving risky behavior or not. So we thought that would be a really interesting thing to get friends on board to help the celebrant have a safe and but still fun birthday. So we got the grant, and we are running it. We're still running it actually right now. We're in follow-ups right now. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But we had nearly 600 students enrolled in the study, and we were able to follow up with 97.5% of them after the birthday. And so that's really good, and we still have really good follow-up rates now. It was rolling recruitment throughout a year, so but we're following up with people for 1 year, up to 1 year after. But our screening criteria was drinking 4 drinks for women, 5 drinks for men, or intentions to drink 4 drinks for women, 5 drinks for men on their 21st birthday, and listing at least one friend who they felt supportive and who they felt they could count on and who would be there on their 21st birthday, and listing their contact information so we could possibly invite them to be in our study. Procedures are pretty similar to the study before. Things are just stretched out a little bit more just because we had to bring people in the lab and for some of these conditions, and so we needed some more time to do this. So about 1 month prior to the birthday, students were invited, completed screen, completed baseline. If they were in our in-person conditions, they scheduled to come into our lab and talk with somebody about 1 week before their birthday, within 1 week before their birthday. In the web conditions, they received personalized feedback intervention 2 days before their birthday. Again, we followed up with them after their birthday. We have 6 conditions in this study. In my head, it's complicated and whatnot. But we have 21st birthday in-person interventions. We have 21st birthday web-based interventions. And we have in-person basics. So we wanted to compare this to the general basics that we know works with college students. And then we have an assessment-only control group. The 2 specific 21st birthday specific interventions, the in-person and web-based, were then further randomized into either only getting the 21st birthday specific intervention or having your friends also invited and getting some getting a very, very brief, if you want to call it intervention or prevention strategies. For the friends, what we did was we recruited them. If they were randomized to that condition, they got invited, and it was all online for the friends, both conditions, all online. They saw some components, reviewed strategies and tips, the same ones that we've been talking about. Here's ways that you can help your friend have a safe and fun birthday. Here's things that maybe you might want to think about incorporating into your celebration. They also got a very, very brief component about their own drinking and their own intentions for their friend's birthday. So, my friend right here is turning 21. You intend to drink X amount of drinks on your friend's birthday. Here's what your BAC might look like. We had the thought that if we could reduce the friend's drinking, then perhaps overall everyone's drinking would go down. This is actually very similar to the first feedback that I showed you before. We tried to reduce the amount of words on the page. We got a lot of feedback from students saying, I just don't want to read all that. Just show me pictures, really. So we tried to cut the words down, but still get our point across. Intentions, this is what you think the typical college student does, and here's what the typical college student actually does. So again, our goal here with this normative feedback is to show or to highlight people aren't drinking as much as you think they do. And they're not drinking as much as you intend to do. This is what we ended up turning that effects and risks chart into, the second chart that I showed you. We heard from students, we did a number of focus groups and worked a lot with college students. And collaboratively we came up with this. And students really like the green, yellow, red colors, the stop sign colors. And we would highlight, this is where your intended 21st birthday BAC might be if you actually drank that much. For this person, it would be possible coma, death. So that's one adaptation that we've done. So preliminary results, we are just starting to really get into this data. But for this study, the mean BAC, estimated blood alcohol concentration, on the birthdays was a 0.186. Remember, this is a higher drinking sample than we had before. Before, our screening was just intending to drink 2 drinks or more. This time it's 4 or 5 drinks intentions. So we have a higher intending sample here. We see relative to the control group that 2 conditions are significantly different. We see that for the most part the means are going in the right direction. 2 significant conditions. 21 web basics, receiving the feedback online, no friend, and our general in-person basics condition. So going from a BAC of 0.21 for the control group to 0.16 for 21 web basics solo and 0.17 for general basics. To give you kind of an idea of what that means, for a 135-pound woman, having a BAC of 0.21 might be having 7 drinks within 1 hour would get you at a BAC of 0.21. For a BAC of 0.16, that would be drinking 7 drinks in 4.5 hours. So we could really kind of see the effect of what that might mean. 0.16, 0.17 is still high, and again, one of the challenges I raise is that these students are intending to drink and intending to drink a lot, and it's okay that they're experiencing some of these consequences. So when they go and look at this chart and they say, not that they're, our hope is that they look at this chart and they look and say like, oh, okay, so here are some things that might be okay to experience, that type of thing. We do see that 0.16 is in the yellow range, and so we are seeing kind of reductions to more moderate, perhaps less risky behavior. So again, to just give you an example, for a 170-pound male, a BAC of 0.21 might look like 10 drinks in 1 hour. For a BAC of 0.16, for that same male, 10 drinks in 4 hours. So we could see that drinking is extending, possibly over larger amounts of time. So moving on to spring break, and I'm going to be running out of time, so I'm talking really fast. There's this perception that spring break partying, that there's a lot of partying going on during spring break. A lot of people are going to Cancun and they're drinking and partying and having sex and that type of thing. our research and others have shown that spring break is actually not risky. Spring break actually could be a reduction in drinking for some folks. What is risky is going on a spring break trip, particularly with friends. That's associated with high-risk drinking. A study done in the Midwest shows that spring break trip takers on average drink 30 drinks across 1 week, with 4 days of the 4 drinking days during that week. Just some data from our own campus, we see that there is a difference between people who go on trips and people who don't go on trips. 38% of students in our sample, we have nearly 1,600 students in our sample. 38% of students report going on spring break trips with friends, and we see that they drink more, the kind of pinkish red bars, and they have higher number of drinks on their peak occasion. They're also experiencing many consequences as a result of their drinking. I'm not going to go over all of these, but just highlighting some of the usual suspects that I've been talking about today. One of the ones that I find alarming is finding themselves in dangerous situations that they wouldn't ordinarily find themselves in, nearly 5%. It's scary. So we have a very similar study designed as our 21st birthday study. Same screening criteria, drinking 4 for women, intending to drink 4 for women, 5 for men on at least 1 day of spring break. These are only people who are going on trips with friends and listing contact information for a supportive friend. We hope to have 600 students enrolled. Right now, we're getting ready to launch our second cohort of students for this winter. So we're busy training our facilitators and getting everything in order right now. Procedures are very similar to before, except now we're going out and inviting students 2 months before their spring break. Same design as before. We are adapting the intervention, obviously, to focus on spring break, and we've been running focus groups. We ran focus groups. We hear from students that they really, really like this normative information, and they just want to know what students do and how they compare to other students. And so we've given them some more information. Here's drinking information. One of the other ways that we have adapted the spring break intervention is to focus on alcohol and sex. Drinking right before having sex, and giving some normative information about the percentage of students who drink before having sex, and to show that most students are not doing this. So kind of in sum, alcohol-related accidents are the leading cause of death among college students. And we have identified specific windows of risk for college student drinking. And we know that these events are even risky for typically low drinkers. One of the things that I find particularly exciting and interesting with some of the stuff that we're doing is really looking at the specific events and how relationships between key constructs may not be as we expect based on cross-sectional or global studies. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And, we're finding evidence that, targeting these events is worthwhile. And that, using our web-based interventions that we've done now in 2 studies and is showing very promising effects, as well as just using our general basics intervention for a specific event. So where are we going with this? So as I said, we're currently still in follow-up with our 21st birthday study. They're getting assessed every 3 months for up to 1 year, the 21st birthday study, and then we're running our second cohort of spring break this year. we're very interested in looking at kind of the effects of these interventions over time and how they may generalize to other drinking on other occasions. So, for example, does our event-specific prevention program translate to other events, New Year's, 4th of July, and does it also translate to general drinking? So does getting something focused only on 21st birthday drinking perhaps have reductions in general drinking 3-6 months down the road? We're also going to be looking at mediators and moderators of intervention. Mediators we have planned are alcohol expectancies, norm perception, and moderators, we're interested in looking at certain characteristics of the friends that were there, as well as environmental characteristics. I'm very interested in this role of friends, and I think we can learn a lot from our studies about how friends influence our own behavior. All of our normative feedback that we present is about the typical college student. I think it would be really interesting to see what are there misperceptions even within group, within cliques, as to misperceptions of drinking and of intentions, and what, I think that my friend wants me to drink 21 shots on my birthday, but really your friend wants you to drink, in a very safe way and drink maybe 5. And so what does that mean? Is it possible that an intervention might be better if we brought a whole group of people in, everybody who you're going to be spending your time with or going on a trip with, and having a conversation, similar conversations, but with a group of people at one time? Also, implementation on college campuses. If we were to really roll this out across campus, a number of different campuses, what might be the best way to do this? Web versus in-person. Obviously, with the web, it's a lot easier. In-person takes a lot of staff time, a lot of training, not as cost-effective in terms of all those things. And so, would a web be just as good? Our effect sizes show? Possibly, yeah. So that's very encouraging. And then continuing to look at event-level analysis of drinking events. And I just have got an RO1 funded recently, and so this is my newest study looking at event-level analyses of expectancies, alcohol use, and consequences. This is with 400 college students, and I'm very excited about this study because I'm really interested in looking at how people learn from their behavior. There's a lot of times when we hear students say, after a Friday night, like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to drink like that again. And, maybe they don't. Or, come Saturday night, they don't drink like that again. They drink more moderately. They maybe have 1 or 2. What happens the next weekend? Maybe they remember, oh, I don't want to drink that. Maybe they don't. So I'm interested in seeing how students learn from their experiences, how it might change their alcohol outcome expectancies, and over what course of time. Are there certain consequences that have more immediate impact on someone's behavior, but might not last as long, versus some things that might last a little bit longer? And those are particularly interesting when we think about timing of interventions. Can we time intervention to match what people are experiencing to get the most bang for our buck? The other kind of interesting thing about this is that we're going to be doing assessments 3 times a day for 2-week intervals across 1 year. I'm collecting data using interactive voice response with cell phones, because students all have cell phones and they're always on their cell phones or texting. And so we're capitalizing on that technology, and very excited to see what happens. I'd like to thank several people. First, my colleague and partner in crime, Dr. Clayton Neighbors, as well as several people in our lab. And in particular, I'd like to thank Angela Mittman, Nicole Fosses, Caitlin Buckingham, and Teresa Walter, who are the research coordinators on all these projects and have spent hours and hours of time working in recruiting students and meeting them and scheduling them for interventions. And couldn't have done this without them, as well as the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute and the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. Thank you.
20 years ago, 25 years ago, Thomas Holmes found two very interesting findings in terms of people that ordinarily drink a lot tended to get their DWIs when their life change points went up. There was a correlation. The second thing is there's, in terms of events where there's some risk for increased drinking, one was high school reunions, because people get together with people and they drink like they did umpteen years ago and they're not the same person, and they had a lot of DWIs. So that's another area for possible intervention in terms of maybe one of these companies that what they do is try to set up reunions and connect people. Just having information on their website might save somebody some grief.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
I'm curious about how you get the data about normal alcohol use and the people who choose to not answer those surveys. I'm wondering if there's been any effort to figure out how much those people who aren't answering the surveys are using, and if your guess would be that they use more or less than the people who are actually responding to the surveys.
Yeah, that's a great question. We typically get, we do large scale surveys. We invite thousands of students to participate. We've run a number of studies across different years, and we get similar response rates to our surveys, ranging between 50-55% of students responding. We do look at the prevalence rates and kind of what they're telling us with national averages, and they're quite similar to what other national studies have been finding in terms of drinking. I think that's a great question. I think that for the most part, I would say that we would have confidence in our norms between the people who are responding and non-responding. We have done some surveys in the past where we've looked at, or studies in the past where we've looked at people who've responded to one thing and perhaps and those who didn't respond to one thing but responded to something else later. And compared them, and we didn't find differences between those people at one point in time who responded versus not responded, and the responses later.
In the UW studies, do you provide any incentives for the subjects and friends to participate?
We do. We pay them for every assessment that they do, ranging from $10 up to $30, depending on the amount of time it takes to do the assessment. We do not pay for doing the interventions or coming into interventions or looking at feedback online. We do not pay for that. But we do pay, and it is up to $100 and some dollars. So a significant amount of time over the course of a year. We have not, no.
Because I would worry if they drank a lot, they might really underestimate how much they actually drank.
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility that they are misremembering. We saw how many people reporting blacking out, and so at what point do you stop remembering how much you actually drank? That's a good point. I think kind of in the rank order of things, people who are drinking a lot, even though there may be some underestimate or overestimate, are probably still on the higher end of that. Yeah. Same time. How about you first, and then you?
I'm wondering if you did a campus-wide rollout of this, if there'd be some concern that I think it was 25% are not planning on drinking excessively on their 21st birthday. So wouldn't you tend to see perhaps an uptick in drinking in that group if you told them the norm is people drink 6 drinks in 1 hour on their 21st birthday? You're only planning on 2. You need to get out there.
Yeah, 6 drinks over the course of the whole night, not just 1 hour. But that's an excellent question. In fact, we've done a study recently. I think actually just is going to be published in the next month or two, right? Where we looked at this normative feedback with abstainers and very light drinkers specifically, because there's always that question: is that if you give normative feedback to abstainers, will they realize, whoa, maybe I should be drinking more. And we found that that did not happen in a randomized study where they got feedback.
And sorry, along the same line, do the abstainers estimate how much they'll drink on their 21st birthday more accurately than those who plan to drink?
That's a good question. I haven't looked at that specifically about birthdays, but we know that when we ask abstainers in our studies, they overestimate how much other people are drinking on campus. So there is still this great misperception of what other people are doing. And so in our abstainer feedback, we really think that's important to continue to show that not everybody is drinking. And we also frame, for abstainer feedback, we frame our messages a little bit differently to show that they're not necessarily kind of in this minority of folks who aren't drinking, but have a more positive message framed to show that they're in the majority of folks who actually don't drink or drink very moderately. I think, yeah, you had a question.
Maybe a little bit of a naive question, but how many people, do you have a sense of how many for whom the 21st birthday is the first drink, the first alcohol use? And did that change anything in terms of their consumption?
I haven't looked at that specifically, but I certainly can. I can look at it and get back to you. That's very interesting, yeah.
I could say from supervising, not many. I think there are some, but I would say it was relatively few from doing supervision.
Deb Kaysen was the supervisor on this project, and she was saying, yeah, not many.